Welcome to America's Talking. I'm your host, Cole McNeely. America's Talking is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. Today we're discussing protests that are occurring on college campuses across the United States. And joining us today are a couple editors and a reporter from the Center Square. First, we have David Mastio. He's regional editor for the Center Square. David, thanks for joining us on America's Talking.
Thanks for having me.
We also have the Center Square's Mid-Atlantic regional editor, Sarah Roderick-Fitch. You're back, Sarah. We didn't run you off last time.
No, thank you so much for having me back.
And we also have Washington State reporter for the Center Square, Spencer Pauley. Spencer, thanks for being on America's Talking this week.
Thanks for having me, Cole.
So as I mentioned, we're discussing protests that are happening on college campuses across the nation. Sarah, this has been largely publicized across the board. The Center Square has done a lot of work on this. Can you kind of give a backdrop as to what are these protests? What are they about? What is that starting point that created this wave of protests across the United States on college campuses?
Well, it started, of course, really the catalyst for it was the October 7th attacks. Hamas attacked and massacred 1,200 Israeli civilians in the Gaza. And then subsequently, Israelis led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just went in there and have gone to war with Hamas. After years of issues, Hamas has sent over rockets. I mean, they've been a thorn to the side of Israel for a long time, in addition to their neighbors and partners up north, Hezbollah and Lebanon. So Israel has had some major issues with terrorism, and a lot of it stemming from Hamas. But anyway, Palestinians and supporters claim over 30,000 Palestinians have been killed since this has been going on. And so a lot of these protests and encampments have popped up. One of the things they're saying that they are promoting and wanting to get out of this is it stems from the BDS, or boycott, divestment movement and sanctions against Israel. That's essentially kind of what some of these protesters are saying. That's what they want. However, at the heart of it, you can't ignore posters and chants and everything else from the river to the sea, which is problematic. That is not divestments or boycotts. That is basically what it means is the Palestinians to wipe Israel off the map, for the Palestinians to take over and the state of Israel no longer exist, and obviously Jewish people. And so that is also part of this. That's one of the other problems with it becoming like the hate stuff, the violence and everything that goes along with it. So that's what's basically has been going on, and it's been building from there. And there's a lot of agitators too, outside agitators that have taken part and are going along with this and saying, hey, this is a perfect opportunity for us.
Yeah. So Spencer, as Sarah mentioned, a lot of this has to do with divesting. That was the word she used. You cover the state of Washington, and in Seattle, there's an encampment at the University of Washington as students. It started off small, but it's starting to grow. What's happening on the University of Washington campus, and what are the conversations around, again, that word divesting? I don't know if that's a word that people may in their everyday, vernacular use all the time when they discuss political things. I mean, when we talk about divesting, what are we really talking about? And what are these protesters, talking about it specifically with the University of Washington?
When it comes to the University of Washington, demonstrators are demanding that the school divest from Israel, whatever kind of funding the school is giving to the country in whatever kind of capacity, which I haven't seen. That is something that they are staying in the middle of campus in tents to, protest. But along with that, demonstrators are asking the school to cut ties with Boeing. Boeing has been a research partner with UW since 2015, and they have invested in the company before to build, engineering buildings that, students use for research with engineers. But at the encampment, surprisingly, with Seattle being so proactive with pro-Palestine protests since, October 7th, the encampment has been relatively peaceful, I would say. You're seeing students having conversations with anyone who comes up. You're seeing prayer being held, but so far there's no police presence. You do see some, counter protests from Israeli protesters, but it's nowhere near the scale you're seeing in, say, UCLA or Columbia.
Yeah, and let's stop right there, Spencer. You mentioned UCLA. David, and another West Coast state over there in the state of California, Spencer mentioned in Washington has been relatively peaceful. Not exactly what we're seeing at UCLA.
Last week, classes were canceled after a night of violence. What makes UCLA stand out is that a large contingent of counter-protesters were gathering there, and they were looking for trouble. The original protesters, the pro-Palestinian protesters, were preparing for trouble as well. We published drone video of the protesters practicing for hand-to-hand combat inside their encampment. And that's exactly what happened last Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. Police stood by for hours while the two sides battled, sometimes using metal batons, using bits of construction debris, wood sticks, wood boards. Some people said they saw nails on the boards, and some people went to the hospital. The next day, classes were canceled, and the counter-protesters were largely gone. The police have moved in and gotten rid of the encampment. There were hundreds of arrests the next day.
And Sarah, on the other side of the country, we talked about this happen on the West Coast. We're seeing this on the East Coast as well, specifically at Columbia, but at George Washington University as well. I mean, what's going on in those two campuses? Is it similar, different? I mean, is it essentially the same as what we're seeing at UCLA?
Similar. The one at Columbia received a lot more attention. That sort of was the big one that kind of started with it, sort of as a domino effect from there. Obviously, the one at Columbia became extremely violent when agitators, and I will say agitators because several of the people that were behind this were not students, were not associated with Columbia University at all, but broke into one of the buildings and occupied it for 24 hours or so and wanting their demands and kind of took hostage sort of in there. And then it came to a point where up until that point, Columbia University did not want to involve NYPD at all. They were just hands off. There were deadlines and demands saying, hey, they were going to suspend students and whatnot. And it was a lot of back and forth. And then it reached a point where they could no longer, put up with it. It became kind of out of hand and it did become violent. And so since then, interestingly, NYPD came across a lot of materials, pamphlets and whatnot that really had sort of to the terrorism messages, to death to America, and sort of the jihad sort of messages on there, and really kind of scary, those messages. Currently, right now with George Washington University, there are encampments there similar to what New York did or Columbia University did. They're sort of a hands-off. They're allowing the encampments to continue to be on campus. There are a lot of lawmakers in D.C. who are critical of the university and critical of the District of Columbia for not taking them down and going in there and cleaning it up. They haven't obviously escalated to the level that the protesters at Columbia did, but time will tell. And so a lot of these places, it's fine until the encampments come up. Here in Virginia, for instance, UVA, last week, it was fine. As long as they weren't having encampments, and then there were encampments put in and they had to come in and clear them out. And there's a lot of back and forth going on that and criticism of this police and whatnot. And so it's really interesting to see where this goes, but we'll see what happens with George Washington. I mean, that's definitely a fluid situation at this point.
Back to what Sarah was saying a minute ago about the messages that the New York police found on pamphlets and other materials at the Columbia encampment. I've seen some really incredible pictures of what's going on. The one that sticks with me most is a George Washington University, an older man welcomed into the encampment there, holding a sign that said "The Final Solution" with an Israeli flag on it, which is a direct reference to the Holocaust. That's really scary anti-Semitic stuff that we're seeing at these protests. And I don't think there's much discrimination by the students on who they let in and be a part of these events. There's no line drawing between, people who have good intentions and people who are clearly going too far.
Many years ago, Spencer, in Seattle, we saw something somewhat similar in terms of encampments, big group of people getting together for a cause. It was CHOP. They took over sections of Seattle, and some of the things you're hearing now, right, at the time when we thought about or saw that CHOP movement in Seattle, kind of that same idea of what David was just getting at, which is, well, they had an initial idea, and then all of a sudden, it was led on, kept going, crime started happening, became a much larger issue. Is there a sense, or is there even a conversation in Seattle or that area of lessons learned from years ago when a similar situation happened, or are they just
absolutely
okay? Yeah,
absolutely. I would say that what happened with CHOP, caused a lack of police. Police morality went down in Seattle. We're seeing police staff shortages, which is causing crime to increase. A lot of these instances caused because of just police presence here. So it seems like right now with the University of Washington encampment, which declares itself as an autonomous zone as well within the middle of the campus, as long as things stay relatively peaceful, I don't think you're going to see Seattle Police Department have any kind of presence, because they know from what happened with CHOP that their presence there alone can escalate the situation, causing something to become even worse. Where this encampment is located is directly in the middle of campus. So they would block off, students going to take their finals, go to athletic events, whatever have you. So right now, it seems like the city has learned its lesson in a way. And so far, we're not seeing any issues. David, you talked about how you've seen some anti-Semitic messages. So far here, I haven't seen anything like that. The most violent sign I've seen is a bonk the police sign on one tent. I'm not quite sure what that reference is, but that so far, that's just kind of like a sign to point that police are not welcome here. And so far, it seems like police are okay with that.
And so one of the things that is underlying a lot of this right now is this anti-Semitism. I think, David, you touched on that. There are concerns about anti-Semitism that go beyond just these protests. And Sarah, you actually reported on an ADL report card on anti-Semitism. Why don't you talk about that a little bit and how that is? That's really what's surrounding all of these protests, is this larger sense of growing anti-Semitism. Is it growing? Maybe that's an unfair assumption to make.
I'm not sure it's growing, but I think it's been there. I think it's becoming. I think it's just sort of people are able to see it now, and there's more demonstrations, examples of it, and it's just more, I guess, visible. It's more visible now. The ADL report card, I did a piece on focusing on the Ivy Leagues, the classic Ivy League schools, and 7 out of 8 of them received D's or F's for anti-Semitism. And I reached out to the ADL, and obviously some of the situations and what's going on, they are looking at the things that are going on in these campuses, and they are reassessing how they're grading them. But a lot of these go back. They may go back to the fall. Some of these things have been, ongoing reporting. Some of these groups and the faculty. And I think one of the most troubling aspects of it when looking at these reports is not just, there's obviously threats and stuff like that coming from the students and the student government associations, but it's been the involvement of the faculty and staff at these universities going up to the top level. We're looking at Harvard, MIT, University of Pennsylvania last fall when their presidents testified before Congress, and basically they failed to say, hey, calls for Jewish genocide violated school conduct policies. And the president of Harvard and Pennsylvania, they went ahead and they resigned. They were pushed out. It took some time for the president, Claudine Gay of Harvard, to finally resign. There was a lot of the staff and faculty signed letters, supporting her. And it wasn't until these accusations of plagiarism that came out that was sort of the final nail in the coffin for her. But even after all that sort of stuff that came out, they were still supporting her. And so really, when you look at these reports, it looks like it starts from the top and kind of works its way down. And when you have faculty, there have been faculty that have been arrested in some of these places in encampments and have been supporting this. There was a professor there that was at Cornell and said the October 7th attacks, that he was exhilarated by it during a campus rally. Now, he has since taken a leave of absence, but those are just some of these examples of what is going on in some of these campuses. And that's a little bit more, that's more deep-seated, I think. And so these are the people who are teaching. And I actually did a report, too. I think we have to look at, which hasn't been examined, too, is, eventually, I think, looking at what is the influence going on in the public schools as well. I did a piece last fall that was actually in my community of a teacher who worked at the school district, had a booth, a Palestine booth, and was a map of Israel, but it just said Palestine. There was no reference whatsoever to the state of Israel. And that's a really scary sort of idea. And that, again, is like, hey, there's no existence of Israel. So it's in there. It's, this has been ongoing, obviously. So this isn't just since October 7th.
And David, as Sarah just mentioned, concerns up the ranks at college campuses. And Sarah brought up some instances that wwere very blatant, obvious activism or anti-Israel activism. Not all criticisms of college professors are as, I'm going to say, maybe not black and white, but as obvious as saying, well, you got in front of a microphone, you said this thing. Some of it comes in the form of political activism to some degree behind the scenes.
There's an old tradition in journalism, follow the money. And that's the report that I did for the Center Square, was about college professors and two anti-Semitic congresswomen, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. Both of them are Muslim Democrats. Both have gotten in trouble for really shocking anti-Semitic things. Rashida Tlaib has been censured by the Congress for using the genocidal chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, referring to wiping Israel off the map in a video. Anyway, what I found across the country, there are more than 400 college professors who have given these two anti-Semitic congresswomen thousands of dollars. And at Columbia, I looked and I found 7 professors and even a vice dean who had given them money. In California, it was even more shocking. Over the last 3 election cycles, University of California professors had given the duo more than $120,000. It raises the question, what other anti-Semitic causes are these professors giving to? At the University of Missouri, I found a cluster of Muslim medical school professors who were giving money to these two. What kind of education are they giving to Jewish students? What kind of education are they given to non-Jewish students? And are they encouraging anti-Semitism? I don't know. There are Title VI investigations going on all over the country. This is where the Justice Department looks into anti-Semitism on college campuses. There's one going on at Columbia. I think this should be part of the investigation. Who are these professors? Who are their money going to? And what are they teaching in their classes about Jews?
Exactly. Yes, actually, thank you, Dave, for mentioning that. Out of the 8 Ivy League schools, once again, 7 of them are being investigated currently for anti-Semitism. And if you look at the top schools across the country, and if you actually look at some of these reports, you'll find, sadly, that most of them are under investigation and for this. And it seems that it's rampant. It's not really, I think too, is Dave makes an excellent point, looking at the University of Missouri. It's not just isolated to these Ivy League schools or these top schools that we think of. It is, I think you can find it at universities across the country. I know that was even an issue when I was in college in West Central Illinois, and this has been ongoing. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what comes out of these investigations.
What interests me particularly is that this going on at the state schools, where it's taxpayer money that's paying for this anti-Semitism, and I think it's more widespread than people know.
Well, and Dave, as Sarah mentioned, she kind of said, well, it's always been there, right? It's always been there. Maybe just more of a a focus on it now because of the events that have happened. I'm going to ask you to project a little bit here, but I mean, where does this go? I mean, is there actually a path forward where we all live in harmony and, kumbaya, or is this just going to keep on going until, the conflict in the Middle East, which seems to always be there, continues to have? I mean, what is this just bound to occur in perpetuity to some degree?
Anti-Semitism has always been there. But if you look closely at the way campuses have operated over the last 15 or 20 years, there's really been a sea change in which a wave of older, liberal, but open-minded professors have left, and a much more activist cadre of progressive professors have moved in from campuses in Missouri and Nebraska all the way up to the top campuses at Harvard and Columbia and UCLA and Berkeley. And they're a much different, much more political breed. And that's where you've heard this idea of DEI statements, diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. They don't want to hire any professors who are not like them ideologically. And campuses have become a monoculture where college professors only come in a left-wing flavor. And anybody who is not left-wing hides their politics in order to advance and get tenure.
Sarah, I know this has been a topic that for a long time you personally have been interested in, have done a lot of research on. We got only a few minutes left here. I want to give you the final word on this, put a nice bow on this conversation we've had today, and I'll just kind of give you the floor.
Yeah, well, I think to look at an example of this and to, again, build on what Dave said, I think to look at this to see how this operates in the Middle East and specifically in sort of the Palestinian territories. One of the most troubling things is, and actually this goes on, and I would say the Islamic world. We can look at Iran, the Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran as an example. There is, as they say over there, is anti-Semitism is in their mother's milk. It is taught at a young age. Specifically, there's been so many over the years pictures and what things and whatnot and educational materials I've seen of small children as young as 2 or 3 with bandanas of Hamas or Al-Qaeda or Muslim Brotherhood or Hezbollah, any number of those terrorist organizations, with these children holding machine guns, learning this stuff in school. Learning this stuff at a young age, and they are learning this. And I think a perfect example is if you go to Iran. I mean, hey, they want to kill Jews, they want to take out Israel, everything. If you went through to Iran and you talk to some of these people, how many of them have actually met a Jewish person in their life? If you look at the map, where's Iran located? Where's Israel located? They're so far apart. Why is there such hatred for the Jewish people and the Israeli state? And it is gotten into their, like I said, with their education. And it's a generational problem there throughout the Middle East and the Islamic world, really set on it. And I think that should be a warning sign for the West, is to look at that and thinking, is this what's coming for us? If this is what's going on in the universities and college campuses, they are teaching future teachers, which then the kids are learning from them. So how far does this go into our education system, and what are these kids learning? And I think that this is an eye-opening, this is a time where we have to sort of look into that and look, like I said, look deeper, look at the schools, look at elementary schools, look at junior highs, high schools. What is being taught there? What are the materials? Is this ongoing? We haven't seen it really in some of these schools. We did see it a little bit in Virginia. There were some walkouts and whatnot at some high schools. But that's, I think, some of the most concerning stuff.
A well-regarded pollster, who his name is escaping me at the moment, did a poll of 1,000 kids 18 to 24 and found that 1/3 of them think that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. That's really an incredible ignorance of the Holocaust and all that the Jewish people have been through over the last century. And it really does concern me where these views are coming from that would be so anathema to their parents and their grandparents.
Certainly concerning across the board. Sarah, David, Spencer, complex topic. This you could. People have written books about this, and best we could about cover in a half hour here of what's happened on the ground right now in the United States, particularly on college campuses. I want to thank the three of you for joining us today on America's Talking. If you enjoyed this podcast and this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com.
Attention parents, teachers, and taxpayers. Do you care about the decisions being made in K-12 public education? Do you want to know how those decisions impact your students and school district? Chalkboard News has you covered. We're delivering fact-based reporting on the policies that shape school safety, curriculum, and recovery from learning loss. At Chalkboard News, we're cutting through the politics and focusing on the facts behind the issues impacting students, teachers, and families. Get this news delivered to your inbox for free by signing up at chalkboardnews.com.